All right. Today I am announcing the filing of criminal charges by my office in the case of State of Kansas versus Jose Ceballos. To be filed, it has been filed in Comanche County, Kansas. Mr. Ceballos, age 54, resides in Coldwater, Kansas, and is not a United States citizen. He is a legal permanent resident of the United States and a citizen of Mexico. He is being charged with 3 counts of voting without being qualified in violation of KSA 25-2416A2. That is a level 7 non-person felony, and 3 counts of election perjury in violation of KSA 25-2411. That is a level 9 non-person felony. These charges carry a potential maximum penalty of up to 68 months in imprisonment and up to $200,000 in fines. The charges are based on his voting in the 2022 general election, the 2023 general election for local offices, and the 2024 primary election. He was served a summons yesterday, November 4th. His first appearance is scheduled for December 3rd, 2025 at 1:30 p.m. This not part of the prosecution, but worthy of note in this case is the fact that Mr. Ceballos ran for and was elected to the office of mayor of Coldwater, Kansas in 2021 and is currently serving in that office. And he was on the ballot yesterday for the office of mayor. Kansas law at KSA 15-209 requires a city officer to be a qualified elector, and being a qualified elector requires that person to be a United States citizen. It is not a criminal offense to be in violation of that law, but it is worth noting. Finally, as a policy matter, I'd like to say that non-citizen voting is a real problem. It is not something that happens once in a decade. It is something that happens fairly frequently. And as many people who covered the case where the Kansas law requiring proof of citizenship to register was challenged in court, the expert witness provided by the state testified that it is likely there are thousands of non-citizens on our voter rolls in Kansas today. So it's a very real issue. And one of the reasons that those individuals have remained on our voter rolls is because you can't simply look at the voter rolls and say, that person's a citizen, that person's not a citizen. The only way you can discover that a non-citizen is on the voter rolls is if some sort of external information comes to light, which indicates that that person is not a U.S. citizen. In large part, our system right now is based on trust. Trust that when the person signs the registration or signs the poll books saying that he's a qualified elector or that he is a United States citizen, that the person is telling the truth. And in this case, we allege that Mr. Ceballos violated that trust. And finally, I should note that all people are presumed innocent until proven guilty in any criminal trial, and that is of course the case here. Now I want to turn it over to the head administrator of elections in the state of Kansas, our Secretary of State, Scott Schwab.
Thank you, General Kobach. So as it relates to this, I just want to say on the policy side, we now have tools, thanks to the current White House, that we haven't had for over 10 years, that we can check through the SAFE program to find out if folks end up on our voter rolls. And they could be a legal resident, but they're not a citizen, and we want to make sure that gets clarified. If they voted, then it's a crime. And we have run that system. We're currently verifying. We don't want any false positives. But Attorney General, be prepared to be busy as we go through these and find out potential positives of people who are non-U.S. citizens that have voted. I'll tell you, I'm a little bit more surprised if this happens. I was never really a big believer this happens. I always came from the angle of let's prove it's not happening, and then we get the data. And it's important we clean this up. And we're also working with Social Security to also find out people that are no longer collecting Social Security because they're no longer alive. We want to make sure they are no longer also on our voter rolls. And that's 10 years worth of voter roll maintenance that we haven't been able to do, that we are doing as we speak. So with that, I'll hand it back over to the General unless you have questions for me after.
Yeah, we can take questions now.
I do have a question, actually, too. First, you say this happens fairly frequently. Define fairly frequently, once or twice a year or more than that? And then second, how did the local election officials not know that he wasn't a citizen? I would think in a small town that would be fairly common knowledge.
So the specifics of how we came to know that this individual was on the voter rolls and voting, we're not at liberty to talk about right now. That's part of the investigation and the case. But you certainly raise an interesting question, John, and that is, he ran for mayor, and prior to that, he served on the city council. And so one might guess that, I don't want to speculate, but obviously, in a small town, it's a town of about 680 people, I believe, one would think maybe people would be aware of this, but maybe they wouldn't, I don't know.
How long was he on the city council before he was mayor?
My understanding is that he served 2 terms on the city council.
Is it term 4 years or 2?
I believe it's 4 years in Coldwater.
So how long do you think he's been voting in Kansas?
Well, our indictment, our criminal complaint only refers to these 3 elections. And as an attorney in the case overseeing the prosecution, I'm not going to talk about whether he may have violated the law prior to what we allege in the complaint.
I'm just curious, what convinced you that that the intent here? There have been some questions sometimes when we've had a couple of these cases, election fraud cases, where the people who get charged talk about, well, I thought I could, they had some misunderstanding about the way the law works or something like that. Is that a possibility in this case, or do you have evidence that he knew he wasn't supposed to vote, or does that matter?
I can't comment on that question with respect to this case, but to your final point, John, it probably doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if the individual did commit the crime, whatever excuses an individual may have probably aren't going to be relevant to whether the crime was actually committed. But to your earlier policy question, you asked how often does this happen? With the information that we will now have from the federal government allowing the state to use the SAVE system, which will verify the SAVE system is the list of all known non-citizens in the United States, right? And it can determine if the person is here legally or illegally. We have never had access to that. During the 8 years that I was Secretary of State, we asked the federal government for access to that. We never got it. And when you have that system, that gives you the external evidence that you need, that you otherwise don't have, to look at the voter rolls and say, oh, now we can tell whether this person A is a citizen or a non-citizen. So absent an external tip or some other indicator from the outside, we never had the ability to look at the voter rolls and see. My understanding, based on the expert testimony from that case, is that the likely number of individuals on our voter rolls who are non-citizens is going to be in the thousands. And I say, therefore, if let's imagine you have 1,000 people, it is highly probable that a significant percentage of those 1,000 people voted, just like you can say, X percent of Kansans overall participated in an election. One might assume that the same percentage would apply there.
I would also add that if someone's on the voter rolls, they sometimes when they register to vote, they check them non-U.S. citizen. And then clerical error puts them on the rolls because the person doing the data input isn't checking that, because eventually it becomes robotic when you're coming to the filing deadline and you're processing all this paper. And oftentimes, so they're on the rolls and they're trying to become citizens. There's a way to say, well, are you a citizen yet? And that's an important question to ask them, because if they are a citizen now, we want to make sure, then we've got bad data. So it's not just going after people and looking for crimes. It's also helping people be put in the right place of where they belong. And it's about also showing the people of Kansas, we are doing what we can to make sure you guys know our voter rolls are as clean as we can. But we're using every tool we have access to. We have more now than we ever have before.
Let me add to what the Secretary said. So one of the benefits of the 2011 law on proof of citizenship is that it would have prevented individuals from accidentally or in ignorance of the law becoming registered as non-citizens. And I made that point many times in front of some of the reporters here in this room, That is a benefit of that law. It prevents people who aren't sure whether they are entitled to vote or not from getting on the voter rolls. And of course, the ACLU insisted that they didn't like the law and they thought they could make the case that it was illegal, and it's therefore not in effect right now. However, it never went to the Supreme Court, and if it had, it would have been a different outcome. I am certain of that.
Is he here in the country legally?
He is here legally, as far as we know. It is believed that he has we know that he has a lawful permanent resident status.
He was elected mayor yesterday, so what will happen with that election?
So, they still have the 3-day grace period, so the election's still going on, and then the Board of Canvassers still have to go that. So the election's not over, so we can see how that turns, but eventually it comes up to the governing body to decide whether or not he should be seated, but the law says he should not because he's not a lawful elector.
So what happens to everything the city did when he was on the commission and mayor?
That's a question probably for the county attorney or the city attorney, because I don't even know what all they did.
Was the SAVE program used to identify this case? Or are you
I
hopeful
can't,
that-
yeah, we're not gonna talk about that, that's the investigation side, and I'll leave that to the general.
We had multiple indicators of this person's non-citizen status.
Was one of the indicators his political opponent?
No, not to my knowledge.
Attorney General, the proof, the voter ID, the law where you show your photo ID at the polls, that wouldn't have flagged his non-citizen status?
No, because you can have as many of us did, we had a Kansas driver's license, and unless we got the yellow star version of the license, which means that you proved your citizenship, you can have a license and not be a U.S. citizen. And indeed, many temporary aliens and permanent lawful aliens in the United States have Kansas driver's licenses. So driver's license is proof of identity. It is only proof of citizenship if you have the star, meaning it's TSA compliant.
I'd also add to that the law says that you don't, it has to be government issue, it has to have your name, and it has to have your picture. So the door badge that we use to get into our offices is government issued, it's got a picture on it, it's got my name. If you had anything like that issued, it's a qualified voter ID.
I know you said the complaint only goes to 21. Do you guys have a date for when he actually registered to vote?
It's public information, you can figure that out. But that's
Can
not
you
part of the
guys
case.
answer that question?
I'd prefer you to just do the research, but yeah, let's just say he has been registered to vote prior to these charges.
General, I think that star is proof of lawful and not proof of citizenship, I believe. So
That's true.
You all might wanna
That's
check
correct.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I believe that is the case,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't want to put that in there.
With the allegation that there's more of this going on and now the SAVE system resources, should we expect that if more cases of this are found and more charges are filed, that you will be announcing them as they are found?
So we will be receiving information from the Secretary of State's office as they determine probable instances of non-citizens on the rolls. But then there are they will be deduplicating, making sure that they aren't the same person, using a short version of the name and large, and also ensuring that it's not a false positive. Once we receive that information from the Secretary of State's office, then there would be all kinds of questions. I don't know how large the number is going to be. My early indications are that it's a very large number. And then at that point, obviously it's a greater violation, or it entails more violations of law to vote and to be registered. In registering, if one is not a U.S., during the registration process, you have to swear that you are a U.S. citizen. That's a violation of the law. To vote, there are multiple violations of the law, as was the case in this particular prosecution. So, to answer your question, we will have to see this big pile of evidence and decide which cases to prosecute.
I want to add that, no our hearts here, this is not to take illegal voters off voter rolls. This is people that everyone would agree, and we would have facts to justify before a court that these people should not be on the voter rolls and they committed a crime. This is not a witch hunt, this is just us doing what the legislature's told us to do.
I did want to, again, circle back to a large number. What in your mind is a large number? Dozens, hundreds? I mean,
I would
what
say,
justifies the use of that term?
John, as I use the phrase "a large number," that to me means, hundreds.
Okay.
My impression is it's going to be like the expert witness said at the beginning, back in that case in 2015 or 2016, that it's going to be more likely in the thousands.
Right, but all of the people who are on the rolls potentially on the rolls as non-citizens, a certain percentage of them will be citizens, a certain percentage will be not, and then a certain percentage will not have cast ballots.
Right, so
And
that's-
I'm trying to
yeah.
get to the significant number of
Okay.
illegal ballots.
I thought when
cast.
we would do this, we might find 3 or 4, and it's gonna be closer to hundreds. And
Okay.
that's and now, is that enough disperse-wise that it would change the outcome of election? I don't know. But I will say, if you broke the law knowingly and willingly, we're gonna hand it over to the Attorney General. And I was shocked. I've been in this office for 7 years, I didn't have this tool, but I was just like, it can't be really that many. We disagreed on this. And then we get the data, and it's a whole new story.
Are other states doing what you guys are doing now?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, Ohio, Tennessee, Florida, I think Vermont was looking at it. I don't know if the secretary decided to or not to. But several bipartisan group of election officials were taken to the White House, and we all were impressed that they were willing to work with us on this. And even some questions that we had that, hey, some of your data's not right. It says they're not a US citizen, and they got sworn in 2 weeks ago. And they worked to update that data so we can get it quicker, so that we know faster that they are in fact a legal resident and can register and vote.
Is there any thought about reviving the proof of citizenship law? Is there a way to rewrite it and change it so that you could get it past the courts?
Well, I'm not worried about getting past the courts. I'm worried about getting the United States Supreme Court's final version of the matter. There is no question the United States Supreme Court would have upheld the Kansas law, and I believe will uphold an Arizona law that's very similar, that's currently on its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Hypothetically, if the United States Supreme Court would rule in the Arizona case that it is perfectly legal and perfectly constitutional for a state to require proof of citizenship, then at that point, I think it would be appropriate for the state of Kansas, which by a very large majority, a bipartisan majority, by the way, passed that law. I think I even remember the numbers. I think it was 32-8 in the Senate. No, sorry, it's even bigger than that. It was, anyway, over 33 in the Senate, and in the House it was 111-11. Easy number to remember. And the majority of Democrats voted in favor of that law in 2011. So it would be appropriate when the United States Supreme Court finally weighs in on this question for Kansas then to revive its law. And there are a number of ways that could be done.
For voters who read the news today or tomorrow on these charges, how should they be interpreting this around the safety and security of elections in Kansas as a whole?
Well, you can know this, and that is that the fact that we are bringing charges in this case means that there is, I would say, unassailable evidence. Most of this evidence is documentary in form, that this happened here. And voters should be aware that both the Attorney General and the Secretary of State are determined to do everything we can to prevent illegal voting in Kansas. And by illegal voting, I mean voting by someone who's not a U.S. citizen, regardless of their immigration status. And I would also mention that, every time a non-citizen votes, it effectively cancels out the vote of a U.S. citizen. In a case like this, if speaking more broadly, but if a person who is not a U.S. citizen actually ends up on the ballot for an office, then a U.S. citizen lost the opportunity to obtain that office. So it's the same point. There is the denial of something to U.S. citizens when we don't, when a non-citizen is able to vote.
Yeah, I do. So I've been pretty vocal on protecting elections for the past 7 years. And a perfect picture of the trust of our elections is when Derek Schmidt lost, now Governor Kelly, they both signed the document to certify that election. So overwhelmingly, our elections are secure, but I've said it for 7 years. We look at election security sort of like we look at cybersecurity. You could win today, but then you find out something new, and then you gotta find another way to make it better. And that's what we're getting here today, as we now have the SAVE Act data, and we're going over 10 years worth of data or more. And so it's a process, but when we come out, we end up having a number, like here's the number of people we can verify that were non-US citizens, that were on the voter rolls, never voted, give you the number, here's the ones that did vote, we give that to him.
You know, I would just say back to your point, John, about, you know, what's a big number? Is it significant? You know, one of the arguments that is constantly made by the left in the United States, who do not like efforts to secure our voter rolls and secure our elections, they say, well, it only happens X number of times, and even though that number of times may be a 3-digit or a 4-digit number, look at the millions of votes that were cast. And so, as a percentage of total votes cast, it's not very large. Well, that argument is a red herring. The fact that it's happening in a close election is totally different, because let's just imagine you had 10 votes that were illegally cast in an election. If the margin is 2,000 votes, then it didn't affect the outcome. But if the margin is 5 votes, which is often the case, and every reporter in this room knows that in state legislative races, there are multiple races every cycle that are less than 10 votes, the margin. Then it does potentially affect an outcome, but I would argue that even when it doesn't affect an outcome, it still effectively takes the vote away or cancels the vote of a US citizen. So, you know, I'm sure that if you seek to obtain a quote from someone in the ACLU today, they will say, oh, this happened such a tiny number of times compared to the total number of votes. But what we are talking about now that we have these new tools available to actually look at the voter rolls, it's not a tiny number. And when you have a close election, even a small number can tip the scales.
Well, but that does beg the question.
But this will be the last question.
If you had, let's say, we have 1.9, 2 million registered voters, and you found, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 non-citizens on those rolls. In a percentage terms, that's still a pretty clean roll.
Yeah,
It's
right,
not perfect.
right, but the goal is to get better.
Right.
And now we have tools to get better. So let's say we don't have that many. Let's say we're wrong, we come back, yeah, it was 80. Well, now we have vote of confidence because it was only 80 and we were able to find it. If we find out it's 2,000, well, now we need vote of confidence because now we're going back and cleaning it up. Either way, it's a win-win.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank-